Right. What did you do this morning?
I went for a bike ride.
Yeah, you look like you've been outside.
Well,
You got like a sunburn.
I have this tan line that goes like
Right.
this,
That's from skiing.
and then of course I ride a bike, and I've got a helmet on and I've got glasses on, so it
Oh,
kind
that's the perfect place to start. So, Ted, I'm Marcelyn McNeil. I'm a painter.
Hi, I'm
You're,
Larsen.
and you make work that's a conversation about painting and sculpture.
I guess I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But leading into what you just said, I love that question. That was my favorite question. Is there a relationship between your sports and your work or your practice?
Well, there might be. I've never really thought about it that way, but I love sports analogies. I love, the things that coaches tell players, and the way that there's rules to games, and you play your game, and you play your game. You don't try to play somebody else's game. You try to do what you do best, and try not to do the things that you don't do as well. Um, and I think those are really important.
Is there something about like the work ethic involved in being a serious athlete and something about the commitment to studio practice, or is that just kind of a
Well, I mean, there's a lot of pain that's involved in sports. You do have to go into the red zone. You do have to go into an uncomfortable place to work. Um, and there is a lot of truth to that in making work, as opposed to, you know, sports. If you don't do well, it's temporary, it's temporal, it's over, and then you move on. But if you don't do well, um, in the studio, the consequences feel larger. Um, but the sports that I participate in have consequences. I used to play basketball, and the consequence of losing a game was you lost, and you worked really, really hard, and practice and did all these things that would make it possible for you to potentially win, but you didn't always win. But the kind of sports that I'm involved with now are not team sports; they're solo sports. They're individual, and mountain biking and skiing, and I've done them both competitively. And when you wreck on the bike, or if you wreck in skiing, the consequence can be serious. You can get hurt. And the consequence of wrecking, if you will, to keep the metaphor, in the studio is not necessarily dissimilar. You can get hurt, um, because we're so close to our work, because we work for something to be successful, but that doesn't mean it's going to be. Um,
right?
and our standard for success, unlike sports, which is absolute, you cross the line first, you win. You score more points in a certain period, you win. But the ambiguity of making work doesn't have those defined metrics. And if we allow other people to set the metric for us, to make the standards for us, then we're not honoring our work. We're honoring other people's work. And it's
Mm-hmm.
our job to make our work. That's like what I said earlier about play your game. You know,
Right.
that's why that's so important. Sports metaphors, I think, are really apt in many ways.
Yeah, I do. I totally feel like there's some kind of a definitely a crossover. I'm curious, like you've been talking about these things during during this specific time. Has it influenced things in the studio, or no? It just obviously we are all psychologically impacted by this, and it affects us like the ways that you're talking about. You just as a person moving through the world. But have you anything specific that you tie to something you're doing in the studio, or not so much?
That's funny that you mentioned that, because yesterday I had this kind of realization about how heavily this situation is actually on me.
Yeah.
It weighs on me. And it doesn't weigh on me in like the particulars of how I work in my studio or anything like that. I think what weighs on me is, um, having like my studio is like a Zen temple for me. It's a very sacred space. And
Mm-hmm.
I go into it with a lot of reverence. and there's work that's done in there, and that work that gets done in there sometimes is very rote, and it's like just milling wood and gluing things together, and other times it's got a different thing to it that's much more about something that's outside of the process of making work, or applying materials together, whatever. um, but in the end, I do have a desire for a conversation with my work, with the larger world. And this situation that we're in right now makes that very hard to do. It's hard to have a conversation in there with the larger world when I can't. I'm making things and I have no idea what's going to happen with these things now because everything's been postponed or canceled or pushed back, or who knows,
Right.
and the cascading effect of that is really ambiguous, and it's hard. um, going back to the earlier thought about sports metaphors and all of that sort of stuff, where everything has a beginning and an end in sports. You start and you stop. um,
Hmm.
and there's in a certain way, working in the studio, I mean, this is my livelihood. This is what
Right.
I do for a living.
Yeah.
So I don't have a side job, or this is, an ancillary thing that have other income or something. This is it. Um,
Right.
and so, when I have an exhibition, that forms like the stop. I have the start date over here, and the stop date is actually, the exhibition. And so you've got a period that you have to work to that. And that's a final thing. It can't be changed. Whereas, now that's gone. So now it just keeps going.
So do you want to say, you may not want to, but do you want to say anything about what you've got going in studio right now, or?
Well, it's so like that rediscovery, that sense of unknown and wanting to investigate that unknown, is so close to me at this moment and so personal. It is a perceptual issue that's larger than just me. It is about the nature of seeing, both phenomenologically as well as the actual active sight of seeing, which is much more of a process-oriented thing, which implies, cognition and recognition and all of that sort of stuff. So, I've been thinking a bit about what I've been doing recently, and been thinking about, the figure and the ground, the foreground and the background. Um, and my work often relies on its relationship to the architectural space that it sits in.
Can you pin down where the interest started for this relationship with architecture? Like, your work really oftentimes is responding to the architecture of a space or the wall. Do you know what it like? Where did that begin for you?
I was trained as a painter, and when I painted, I dealt with the classic issues that painters deal with, and I still think of my work as painting, no matter how sculptural or freestanding or whatever it might
I
be.
totally get it. I see it. Yeah.
I mean, I'm clearly approaching how I deal with the work as with a painter's mindset rather than a sculptor's. Um, but that all said, I build my work. I mean, the process of making my work has less to do with, um, you know, the traditional ways of painting. I mean, I figured out how to paint without a paintbrush, basically.
Right.
And so, you know, how things are seen, the perception of things, the phenomenological aspect of sight, both as illusion and as concrete as it might be, feel to me very much fluid and always in movement. And I'm always interested in the fluidity of perception and of that the act of sight, because we change all the time. Like I was saying before, I'm not always the same person. I'm mercurial and restless, and sometimes it's crude, and sometimes it's refined. But also, the viewer, I think people has that possibility too, where they're interested in certain things and they can surprise themselves by discovering something which is outside of their normal range of interests, that allows them to see um, something that might normally overlook. And the promise of art is that we can experience the world in a new way. We are offered new ways of seeing.
I have a question, and I'm not to make it about me, but I'm just curious. I have this
God.
experience, and I'm not going to talk about. Oh, there we go. Hi. Um, do you have? Is there something that eludes you in your studio practice? Is there something that you've kind of been after and you just can't quite grab it? I don't know.
Every single So, here's how my experience of my work is. I see what's in front of me and I want to see what's beside me. It's a peripheral thing. It's like I can see it. Have my hand at 90 degrees from my head and I'm wagging my finger. I can see that without looking at it. And I'm looking straight ahead right now. When I do that, that's my experiences with my work. I have something that's in the corner of my vision and I cannot put my eyes on it. Whenever I move my eyes to it, it's gone. So I'm trying to make something which is hopefully possible, and maybe it's eventually going to happen. I don't know.
Well, I guess kind of in line with that, do you make your best work in your sleep when you're dreaming?
Um, it's funny, I wish I knew how I make my best work. I think my best work happens while I'm awake, while I'm actually in the studio working, and I have no idea why it's that good. I cannot tell you. And if I knew, I would do it over and over and over again. I don't know. I think we got enough there.
Oh God, I think we got a lot, right?